I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1764 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about Vietnam veteran Tom Hilzendeger. He used to live out there in Palmdale, California. Palmdale's a wonderful place. It's only about 20 miles northeast of Santa Clarita, California, a place where many outstanding Vietnam veterans reside. It's a wonderful place there. That's also the location of Valencia, California, where I spent some time a few years ago. That's why I know it's a wonderful place. Tom had PTSD. The story says that Tom, with PTSD from water purification duty in Vietnam, found the well and showed the way for others to come and drink. What a story, what a story. They wrote a story about Tom out there in Palmdale, California. The story appeared in the Antelope Valley Press, the local newspaper there. Title of it is, A Vietnam Vet Who Sunk a Deep Well in the Valley. This story was submitted by Dennis Anderson. I'm sharing this story with you in my continuing effort to talk about the greatness of the Vietnam veterans. We went over to Vietnam and served our country in a difficult and trying situation. We came home to not a whole lot of recognition and gratitude from an ungrateful country. Yet we showed our greatness by continuing to serve our country in a wide array of civilian and military pursuits. 50 years later, we can look back on that and see it, and we should all get down on our knees and thank the good Lord above for these Vietnam veterans and all the services they have provided to their country. Tom Hilzendeger was another one of those great representatives of that generation. They speak very highly of Tom out there in Palmdale, as you will soon see when you hear this story that was written about him in tribute. Let's take a look at it. Dateline, Palmdale, California. You could wonder what the connection might be between the Los Angeles City Department of Water Reclamation and the 1st Calvary Division in Vietnam, but the answer is easy: potable water. Same question with a variable in finding the dots to connect between potable water and post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is that mental malady most associated from combat trauma. Happens there is no requirement to be the tip of the spear troops. Happens there is no requirement to be tip of the tier. Just so happens, there is no requirement to be tip of the spear troops to experience PTSD. Many who experience PTSD serve in the combat arms, grunt infantry, artillery, aircrew, armored fighting vehicles, but plenty of other troops can be hit by trauma in the combat zone. My son, the Marine, shared with me, you don't have to be a grunt. One cook in a chow hall that gets mortared or rocketed can have PTSD. Tom Hilzendeger served in a water purification unit, combat engineers, attached to the 1st Cav Division, one of the hardest fighting divisions in the Vietnam War, and for that matter, in other wars before and since. As my good buddy Melvin Page up in Kingston, Tennessee would say, the 1st Cav was one of the fightingest divisions in Vietnam. Of course, next to the Wolfhounds and the 25th Division. Continuing, the lawnmowers are coming. Tom's PTSD, flowing from a rocket attack 50 years ago, led him to seek treatment and understanding of what happened. Decades after the war, he joined veterans group therapy at the VA Vet Center in Palmdale. The Vet Center is not medical. It provides no-cost psychological counseling to veterans who experienced trauma from their service. Combat trauma, military sexual trauma, trauma is trauma, no matter where it comes from. Vet Center started after Vietnam in the belief that veterans understood veterans better than civilians, even family members. A properly staffed VA Vet Center has licensed counselors, ideally combat veterans. Tom was one of the Vietnam veterans who went to the Vet Center soon after it opened a dozen years ago in Palmdale. I was talking about how doing good things made people feel better about themselves, recalled Gary Rice, who was a counselor, licensed marriage and family therapist, and also a Vietnam combat veteran. Rice often cites PTSD treatment pioneers Larry Dewey, author of War and Redemption, and Jonathan Shea, Achilles in Vietnam. He was talking about such concepts in group therapy a decade or so ago. Someone in group asked, "What is altruism?" And Tom took the concept and ran with it, Rice recalled. Tom died Sunday night, June the 7th, 2020, at age 70, after a long battle with cancer. It was a battle he fought, battered, not bowed, until the 15-round bell rang. He was barely old enough to drink illegal beer when he returned from Vietnam 50 years ago. He returned shell-shocked from a rocket attack and knowing something about water. He retired from the Water Reclamation Department after 30 years and was married to his bride, Megan, for nearly 40 years. He even stopped drinking beer and went on the water wagon. Fighting cancer must have been harder than Vietnam because Tom won the fight with PTSD. He heard that altruism word and ran with it. He wanted to raise some money to help veterans. It began with a classic car show in the Vet Center parking lot on Trade Center Drive, and he raised about $1,700. That was 10 years ago. He wanted to help vets returning from Iraq, Afghanistan, from all the wars. Since then, volunteers at the Vets for Veterans group have raised a few $100,000, going to emergency grants, groceries, scholarships for returning vets, and a dream to open a traditional house, temporary housing for veterans' families needing a hand up, not a hand out. The work got done with the Vets for Veterans car and motorcycle show, with 5 and 10K runs and golf tournaments. Tom would be the first to say he didn't do it alone. The volunteers do it, he would say. It wasn't a miracle. It was an activity and others joined in. The story concludes with this line. Tom, with PTSD from water purification duty in Vietnam, found the well and showed the way for others to come and drink. That is the story of Tom Hilzendeger, another tremendous representative of the Vietnam veteran generation. Tom has passed on, and I'll guarantee you he will be greatly missed in his community out there in Palmdale, California. Tom, I know you hear me as I say this. We appreciate greatly your service to your country. Rest in peace. I hereby issue you an official Vietnam Veteran News Podcast salute. Thank you very much. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1276 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more of these stories coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?